Hello ladies and gentle ladies, and welcome back to another Minecraft modding tutorial for Forge 1.20. And in this tutorial we're going to be covering how we can make a sided inventory, or more specifically just sided capabilities for our block entities. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to show you what I mean by this and how this will become useful to us. So if we load up the game, I've created a very simple item capability block entity here. And if I open it up, you can see it's got 3 slots. And yeah, you can put items in all of these slots. So if I just put some items in there, you'll see those all work perfectly fine. Now the idea is that this left slot here will be able to be it will be able to have items put into it from any of these sides. So for example, this hopper here, if we put items in there, the idea is that items will be hoppered into this block. You see currently that does not happen, so that's one of the issues. If we have these and put these in this hopper up here, the idea is that that will put it in the middle slot. And then finally we have items in the right slot here, and the idea is that those should be extracted by this bottom hopper. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to go ahead and do is look at the code. So I'm not really going to show you what I already have, since it is just the item capability tutorial plus the menu tutorial to get that screen up as well. So that's basically all we've got here, and we don't really need to worry about much else. So I'm not going to go through any of that kind of stuff, but I've obviously got a menu, I've got a screen, I've got the block, I've got the block entity, and I've obviously registered everything, and I've binded the screen, the menu, I've done the lang, all those kind of basic things that you will need to do. So let's talk about how we can actually do this. Now, unfortunately, we can't just use this inventory right here. You see here we've got this inventory, which is an item stack handler. And this item stack handler has a size of 3. So there are 3 slots in this one single handler. Now, effectively, that is the issue that we have. Because we have this handler, that means that this is going to be binded to basically no direction. So if we go into this get capability method, you'll see that we're just returning that handler all of the time. Now, when we're using this capability, the one that only takes in a capability, that means that this is not going to be sided at all. So this capability will not be affected by the specific sides. It will not work for any sides. So how can we actually make it work for the sides that we want? Well, instead of overriding this capability method, we can override the overload method, get capability, which takes in a direction for the side. And what this allows us to do is return different capabilities depending on what side we're on. So some of you may already be able to realize that this is how we are going to be able to do this whole thing, and you may not need the rest of the tutorial from here, but I'm going to continue anyways because there may be some other things that will trip you up if you're not careful. So what we're going to do inside of this is we're first of all just going to remove this return super. Now what we're going to do is first have an if statement that says if cap is equal forge capabilities dot item handler. So if we are using the item handler. Now if we're not, we're just going to straight up go ahead and return that super. So nothing special is going to happen. We're just going to return the super, which will take in the cap and the side. If we are using the item handler capability, then we're going to want to return our lazy optionals depending on which side we're on. So the way we do this is we're going to need multiple lazy optionals, and we're going to need basically one for each of the sides that we want to be able to support. So we're basically going to have to remove this inventory. So let's do that. Let's create a private final item stack handler, and I'm just going to call this the top inventory. and that's going to be a new item stack handler. And this is just going to take in a size of 1. And we do need to override that on contents changed method so that this is going to get saved and synced to the client when that's modified. Then we're going to want this lazy optional, but we're just going to call this the top optional. And that is going to be equal to, once again, lazy optional.of. And then we'll just do a supplier of this .top inventory. And then, as you can probably guess, we're just going to copy this basically and do this exactly the same for the other sides. So we're going to have the side inventory. We're going to have the side optional. And then finally, we're going to have the bottom inventory and the bottom optional. And it's very important that you do also make sure you change these. So where you have side inventory, you're going to want to change that inside of the side optional as well. Otherwise, that's obviously not quite going to work how you expect it to. But once you've done that, we can now go back into our get capability. And depending on the side, we can return a different one of these optionals. So we can say, for example, if side is equal to direction dot up, then we can return this dot top optional dot cast. If the side is equal to direction dot down, then we can return this dot bottom optional dot cast. And else we can just return this dot side optional dot cast. So this will effectively allow us to do that depending on the side. Now we are going to need to adjust all of our other code to make this work. Luckily that's going to be fairly simple since it is just going to be a copy paste job. So where we have the load method, we're going to want to load it for each of these item stack handlers. So we'll start by saying this .top inventory is going to deserialize tutorial mod data .get compound of inventory. Let's try again. So we're going to say inside of load that this .top inventory will deserialize the NBT from our tutorial mod data.get compound, and that will take in the top inventory. Now there is one very important thing to note here, and that is that you may instead want to first check that this does exist inside of the tag. And that's a quite important check to do, because otherwise you may find that it doesn't exist and then you will get an error here. So all we can do to do that is say if tutorial mod data contains, we're going to check if it contains the top inventory, and we're going to check if it contains a tag of compound inside of there, and then we can just deserialize that. And then basically we're going to want to do the exact same thing for the side inventory and for the bottom inventory, ensuring that you change both of these keys and ensuring that you change this variable here on each of these times. Then we're going to do exactly the same thing for saving, but in reverse. So we're going to do tutorial mod data.put. We're going to start by putting in the top inventory there. Then we're going to put in the side inventory, and then we're going to put in the bottom inventory. Now we can remove our original get capability method since we don't want to have a capability that is going to be present on all sides. If we did, however, we could keep this and say, for example, return an energy capability here, which maybe would work for all of the sides. And you could do that with, say, fluid as well. It is very important to note that this exact way of doing capabilities per side is going to work for all other capabilities, not just the item handler capability. So that is an important thing to note. So we can remove this method here since we don't have energy, we don't have fluids or anything of the like. Then inside of invalidate caps, we're obviously going to make sure we invalidate our top, our side and our bottom optionals, because otherwise they may become, they may stay valid, which would be a little bit of a memory hog for us, which would not be great. Now here we have the get inventory. I'm just going to remove this, but obviously if you wanted to keep this, you could easily just say get like top inventory and return your top inventory in here. But I'm just going to remove this because we're not going to use this anyways, so we don't really need to worry about it. We are, however, still going to want our optionals, so we're going to have to create 3 optional methods here for both the top, the side, and the bottom. So you see that kind of Copilot is just going to do this boilerplate stuff for us, and that will be fine. One important thing to note, and this is going to maybe be a little bit complicated, but if you want, you can actually use something called Lombok if you include that in your dependencies, and that means you could just, instead of having these getter methods like this, you could come up to your fields and you could say, for example, at getter, and what that would do is that would generate a field for you. You'll see that there is actually a getter annotation, but this is not the one we want. We would actually want one from Lombok, but we don't have that part of Minecraft by default, so that's not something we're going to be using. But that is just something to note if you are interested in that kind of thing, if you think that would help you out. Okay, so I'm just going to compress these a little bit so that we can read them. Now, one thing you may want to possibly consider is creating your own custom item stack handler implementation, and this could possibly do this set changed for you, so it could take in your block entity and then it could call set changed automatically in the contents changed, and also you could have possibly this item stack handler actually store your lazy optional of that item stack handler. That may be a little simpler if you do choose to do that, but I'm not going to be worrying about that because that would mess up our previous tutorials on item capabilities. And that should be pretty much it. We will, however, have some issues inside of our menu. So if we go inside of the menu, you'll see here that we are using our optional to provide the item handler for the slot item handlers. So how are we going to get the item handler now? Well, this is going to be exactly the same, but instead we're going to have to do it for each of the lazy optionals. So for the top, so we're going to say get. Oh, I removed those methods, didn't I? So let's add those methods back. We're going to want those lazy optional methods. There we go. So we can say get top optional. That will give us the inventory, and that will allow us to give our slot. Now, the one we're going to want for top, for me, will be the slot 1. It's obviously important to note that you can have multiple slots per one. So, for example, you could say a size of 3 for the top inventory, and that means you could have 3 slots that work for the top. You could have one for the side, and you could have maybe one for the bottom, and obviously you can have any amount for each of the sides. Another important thing to note is that obviously you don't just have to have one item handler for all of the sides. You can return different ones depending on the side. You could say, for example, if side is equal direction dot north, then you could just return a side one. And you could also like chain or statement, so you could say if the side is north or the side is maybe south, then you could return a specific optional for those. Maybe you just didn't want it to work at all for the west and east, in which case you would just like leave it like this, but we don't want that. We just want this to work for all of the sides, so we're just going to leave it for all of those. All right, so yes, let's move these out of here. So we're going to want to leave it slot 1. So let's first actually just create the other ones. So we'll go side optional, and we're also going to go bottom optional. So for the side optional, that was slot 1 or index 0. So I'm going to put that in there. And then for the bottom optional, that is going to be index number 2. Or the third one, and we can just replace these with lambda expressions because we don't have multiple slots created for each of them, so that's not going to cause us any problems. and we may just want to move the side optional above the top optional. It's completely up to you. I think I'll do that just to keep the indexes in order, and there we go. You might actually have to use index 0 for each of these ones too. I believe you do actually, so we're going to have to use index 0 because it's going to be a different index for the different optionals, and I believe that's correct. I may be mistaken. We'll see when we get inside of the game. And I believe that is absolutely everything. We shouldn't really have to change the quick move stack. However, if you did want a different logic for how it should swap between the different slots when quick moving, then you could perform that logic in here. For example, you could add an extra else if statement. So you could say, for example, else if the p index is less than 37, then you could try and quick move between 0 and 36. You could say another else if the index is less than 38, then you could try and move between 37 and 30, or 36 and 37, 36 and 37, and etc, etc, etc. We're not going to worry about that though. We're just going to keep it exactly the same, just because that simplifies it a lot for us. So change that back to 39, of course. And let's also go into our block class. And inside of here, we're going to need to possibly change our onRemove method. So you see in here, I'm just getting the capability, and I'm saying if present, then I'm going to go ahead and get that inventory. Now you see that since I am using the get capability without a side, this is actually going to pass inside of null. And you'll see that in a null case, all we do is just return the super. So that's actually not going to work for us doing it that way. So instead, what we'll have to do, we have two options really. We can either do it for each of them, so we can just pass in the different sides here. So we could say, for example, direction dot top or dot north, dot up, I don't know what I'm on about there. There you go. So you could do that for each of them, or you could alternatively actually use those optional methods that we have. But that would be a bit of a pain in the arse because we would have to cast it to our block entity. Actually, that wouldn't be the end of the world for us. So let's just go ahead and do that. If it's instance of that, then we're going to say block entity. And then all we need to do once we've done that is say be.get top optional. We'll actually start with the sides and then we'll move on. So block entity.get side optional. Then we're going to do the top optional. Then we're going to do the bottom optional. And you'll see that's basically going to be exactly the same for all of them. There you go. Now, obviously, if you wanted to, you could just create a method inside of your block entity class that can do this logic right here. And that would possibly simplify this a little bit, but we're not going to worry about that too much. Now, that should be everything, I believe. So let's go ahead and run the game and see if it works. All right, so here we are inside of the game. Let's go ahead and start by placing a hopper on the top. And in fact, we'll do the sides because those represent the first slot. So I'm going to place some jungle logs into here. You'll see those start getting taken away and they go into our first slot. Now let's just make sure that putting this hopper on the right and putting a different item in here doesn't put it in a second or third slot. And we can see that it doesn't, so it doesn't go in these two slots, which is good. And hopefully we should see that the jungle logs do also not overflow from this one. There's no reason why they should, but just in case. And you'll see that's perfectly fine. Okay, that's fantastic. And obviously, if we did want to extract from the sides, say we had mechanism or something, then we could try that out. And that should work as well, which we'll be able to see in a minute by using the hopper on the bottom. Now, let's go ahead and put the hopper on the top. And let's go ahead and see if that causes us to put items in the middle slot. Let's also take these jungle logs out so that we don't get those a little bit confused. And this will also take these out as well. So let's try and put some jungle logs in here. And those should go inside of the middle slot, as you can see. And obviously you can let those filter through if you want. I'm not going to bother. And finally, let's put a hopper on the bottom, and hopefully on this right slot, any items that we put in there should get sucked out the bottom. And we can see that they do get sucked out the bottom. So that is pretty much perfect. Now let's go ahead and restart the game. And hopefully we should see that also everything still saves perfectly fine. So let's just make sure. So we'll load back in. Here we are. And we can still see that those all save perfectly fine. And everything is okay. So that is exactly it. We can obviously break this. And we should see that all of those come back to us, which yes, they have. That's perfect. So yeah, that is going to be it for this tutorial. I hope you guys obviously found it useful. In the next tutorial, we're going to be covering fluid handling, which is going to be very exciting, but it's also going to be a little bit complicated because we're going to try and draw some fluids inside of the GUI, which is going to involve drawing quads manually, which is going to be quite exciting, but also quite tricky. So I hope you guys are ready for that. So yeah, obviously, if you enjoyed it or found it useful, please do be sure to give it a like and subscribe. And if you would like to help support me continue making these tutorials, then you can join my Patreon. The link is obviously in the description, and that would be very nice. And finally, if you are having any problems with this tutorial or any of the previous tutorials or any of the future tutorials, of course, then my Discord server is also linked in the description, and you can come get help for any of your problems there, and there'll probably be someone there to help you. Most likely me, if we're being honest, but there will always be someone there. And you can obviously also just come out there to come and chat. We do like would you rathers basically all the time and topics and stuff like that, so it's just a bit of fun as well, even if you're not there for the modding support. So yeah, I will see you in the next tutorial. Goodbye.